This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin.
Food plots are a rabbit hole discussion. It's easy for folks to get over their head sometimes, and that's where Mark and I come into play. So I just really encourage folks who are wanting to start off on the right foot to give your local biologist a call.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. I am your co-host, Ashley Olson, with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and I serve as the agriculture educator in Vernon County. And joining me today as my other co-host is Carl Dooley, who is the agriculture agent in Buffalo County, Wisconsin. So, Carl, we're here today to talk about some wildlife food plots, huh?
Definitely. Last night I was out fertilizing some research plots we have on oats, and some deer came out of the woods to visit me about 7:30, and I asked them not to eat my oat plots, and they obliged and took off. And then this morning as I got up, the turkeys were gobbling. So things in the wildlife are heating up or coming alive, and I appreciate them. I'm not a hunter or fisherman, but I still appreciate wildlife. So it's a little different topic today.
Definitely is. And I'm with you. I definitely appreciate the wildlife. I live near Viroqua, and not only do we have plenty of deer, turkeys, we have lots of raccoons that I've seen as well. And so I'm interested to know today, as we talk more about these wildlife food plots, what kind of animals are we attracting to the food plots?
I think between Mark and Eric, our guests, they'll answer those questions and give us a variety. So we introduced ourselves. So let's have our guests introduce themselves, and maybe we'll start with Jerry Clark. He's a well-known name on our podcast, but today he's going to serve as a guest and as a guest expert.
Oh, thank you, Carl and Ashley. A little other side of the fence today, being on the interview side of this. But yes, I'm a agricultural educator with the Division of Extension, UW-Madison in Chippewa County, serving in the agronomy, crops and soils area for the last 23 years, basically based out of Chippewa County, worked out of Eau Claire for a little while, but have basically done a lot of work within agronomy and growing crops. So we grow things, and then Eric and Mark can tell us how to, we try to keep things away from them, I guess, and now they're coming back. We're trying to attract them in. So little other side of the fence today. So appreciate the invite.
And Mark Rasmussen is our guest from DNR. He is the wildlife, and I don't know if I'll get your title correctly, and you can state it yourself, but he's here in Buffalo County with the DNR. So Mark, if you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then maybe introduce our other guest, Eric.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm Mark Rasmussen. I'm the wildlife biologist with the Wisconsin DNR, covering Buffalo and Trempealeau County. I'm based out of Buffalo County, just like Carl. I've been with the department for almost 15 years now, and I'm going on 8 here, covering Buffalo and Trempealeau County in my current role. And I just, my job is pretty diverse. If it has to do with wildlife in my 2-county area, I'm at least somewhat involved, both from the season setting process, as well as I manage over 20,000 acres of public lands in those 2 counties, manage the habitats on those properties for wildlife and diversity. And then I also provide a role as a consultant to consulting with private landowners in my area who are interested in improving the wildlife habitat on their property. Eric?
Yeah, thanks everybody for having me on. My name is Eric Canania. I am the Southern District Deer Biologist for the Wisconsin DNR out of the Dodgeville office, and I cover 18 counties in a working unit we call the Southern District, and pretty much the deer liaison. So anything that has to do with deer, I usually facilitate that from the individual counties, kind of going up to the top. I also do private lands work and help out mainly during the fall with CWD and other deer season logistics.
Well, I think there was one term that you just said, Eric. I don't think we're going there today, but CWD. But let's talk about the other aspects of both deer and wildlife. And if I could, let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of managing woodlots for wildlife in general versus kind of managing them for deer and for deer hunting. And Eric and Mark, whoever wants to take a stab at that.
I guess I can jump in to start. I think as it goes to woodlots, really management for that is good for deer is going to benefit a lot of other wildlife. I mean, deer are a generalist species. Certainly, there are some management activities that are less beneficial to deer, but pretty much anything you're doing to improve the habitat quality of your woodlands, whether that's timber harvest or invasive species control or supplemental planting or anything like that, is going to benefit deer as well as other wildlife species. But we can get into some more specifics as we move forward, I guess.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, like Mark said, deer are umbrella species, so kind of trickle down effect. When you manage for deer, you're going to benefit a bunch of other species. And working quite a bit with private landowners in most cases, when you give them an option of a management practice that'll only benefit deer and nothing else versus a management practice that'll benefit deer and a bunch of different things, most landowners are eager to kind of go with the broad scale approach.
So when kind of starting to talk about this, what is the difference then? Because we're talking about deer, but between a wildlife food plot versus a deer food plot. I know when I'm talking to a lot of different people, whether they're neighbors, landowners, everyone says, I got to plant my deer plot. But that's not always the case. There are food plots for other animals and wildlife as well, correct?
Yeah, there certainly are. I mean, I think in general, any food plot you plant is going to get used by multiple species of wildlife, just because they're pretty much like clover's a popular food plot. Everything basically eats clover, so there is that. But I tend to think that a lot of deer-specific plots tend to be more monotypic individual species, and then if you're going to be putting a food plot together that's going to be more beneficial for a wider array of species as well as deer, you're going to generally be looking at planting a more diverse food plot.
Okay, you mentioned species. Let's talk a little bit about that, and maybe let's start with Eric. If you're going to plant a plot specifically for deer, let's say we really into whitetail, I'm really into hunting. What kind of species are planted versus what kind of species are really desirable in your opinions?
Well, I'm going to start off by giving the famous biologist answer, and it depends. It's really site specific, condition specific, soils, weather, location, and not only the state but the country, deer density, habitat, surrounding habitat types, and just all those things really go into making a recommendation. So I think most things we're talking about today probably be generalistic, and then interested individuals are always encouraged to reach out to their local professionals for kind of more site specific stuff. But in general terms, anything from your grains, soybeans, corn, oats, wheat, rye, down to a myriad of clovers, and you can get into specifics, species that are planted that aren't very common, like maybe iron clay cowpeas, lab, brassicas, chicory, other things like that. There's a ton of stuff out there, and if you've been to any outdoor store, you've probably seen multiple racks full of different seed blends with fancy lettering and big bucks on them.
Jerry, that gives kind of an opening. You want to hop in there? The difference between the what you might see in a traditional wildlife store versus where you might find other places to buy something similar?
Yeah, and I'm with Eric on this. Where I've always find it interesting the names of the products that are out there with the seed blends from Buckmaster and Monster Buck or whatever that is. So yeah, we usually see these blends pretty popular. They're convenient to buy at some of the sporting goods stores, but you can often find these same seed mixes, or if it is more of a monotype or if it is a mix at your local co-op that might be a third of the price if you're looking for like Mark and Eric said, just the clover. If everything will eat clover, it's pretty cheap to go to your local co-op and get red clover for $4 a pound versus maybe buying, spending $30 for 10 pounds on something that is pretty similar. If it obviously there's mixes, but you can have your local co-op mix up certain blends for you. If it's grasses or grains, like Eric was talking about, it's pretty cheap to make a mix through a local dealer than versus going maybe to the sporting goods store and buying the fancy labeled stuff.
Yeah, one thing I would interject on is one thing I would avoid if you're going to have mixtures is grass. You tend to see annual or perennial ryegrass is a pretty common filler in a lot of food plot mixes, especially the ones you see, with the big bucks on the bag. And it's deer will eat it and other wildlife species will eat it. They're not really preferred forage for pretty much anything. And so it can be a component of the mix if you really want it to be, but it's not something that I would, want to see a lot of in any kind of mix. That's not deer and most other wildlife species are going to focus on stuff that are coming from the forb side of the family.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. I think the other thing to remind folks of is check for some of these can become weeds, like your perennial ryegrass and things like that. If this is to be an annual plot that you're going to plant each year, or you're going to put clover in, or maybe a little alfalfa, something that's a perennial, be careful of some of these mixes that you might buy. There could be an invasive species, or it suddenly becomes a weed, even though it may not be an invasive species, but it could be a problem in your woodland or your field down the road.
Yeah, some of those big names, they use stuff like that as fillers, but not to completely knock on them. They're good in some regards, especially if you have small plots to plant. I've run into issues at some co-ops where you kind of have a minimum or a minimum amount of seed that you can purchase, so that may lend itself to some things. And then there are also some like trademark name blends and specific name brand seeds that you can generally only buy in an outdoor store. But I think in most cases, folks could save a couple extra bucks and go with the brown bag.
And so are you, and this is a question for anyone that's on here today, recommending, as we're talking about some of these different species and blends, these food plots, are they annual or are they more perennial food plots when you're looking at planting? I'm want to put in a wildlife food plot. What should I do?
I can take a stab at that one too. And again, back to the famous wildlife answer, it depends. I think in most cases you want to have a mix of annual and perennial. I think a lot of folks recently gravitate towards perennial because in theory you can plant them and have them stay viable for a number of years, but that doesn't mean you can just plant once and step away. There's herbicide application, mechanical mowing applications, and reseeding that does need to take place. Whereas annuals, you plant them each year. They have one growing cycle. So you do have to plant again and again, but generally kind of the main difference is perennials put a focus on first year growth downward, so the root system, and less upwards, where annuals, not having to last more than a year, focus growth up, so you get a faster, more vigorous growth that in most cases can outcompete some of the common weeds. So that can be a positive for folks planting food plots as well.
Yeah, a good thing to throw in any kind of mix, especially if you are going to be trying to establish a perennial, is oats, because oats will pretty much grow on anything. They dang near grow on pavement if they get some rain, and they can help really serve as a nurse crop and also take some of the forage pressure off of the other stuff, the perennial stuff you're trying to establish, and let that, like Eric said, let that get established and send its growth downward and not get mowed down to the ground by the deer because they're eating on the oats that have sprouted up above everything else.
Hey, I'm gonna throw this out to Jerry. I just bought a piece of property. I have 100 acres, 20 or let's say 10 acres are open. The rest is wooded, and I want to put in some. I want to put in some wildlife food plots, some deer plots, and a combination. We'll hit that. We'll continue on with this with Eric and Mark. But what's my first steps as a? And I don't know anything about growing crops.
Well, yeah, your first step is always a soil test. I think that's where you want to, get connected with your local county extension office. Almost every extension office within Wisconsin either has a connection or provides that service of soil bags, probes, those kind of things. And then whatever lab they are working with or that's local. Many provide the mailers, or you can work with your local co-op as well. There's usually some drop-off points for soil testing. But number one is soil testing. The main thing there is looking for a basic soil test. I don't think you don't need all of the micronutrients and things like that for a deer plot or a wildlife plot. But I think what you're mainly looking for is to get the pH, which is the acidity of the soil. And then you'll get some recommendations for your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then that soil test comes with some recommendations that you can follow. It just helps, I think, the overall health of that food plot, simply because if it is something like legumes, I know cowpeas were mentioned, these kind of things that are legumes, usually a pH of 6.3 is needed. So if you have a very acidic soil, you're going to need to apply lime maybe a year ahead of time to get that ready. So if you're seriously thinking about a food plot, plan at least 6 months to a year ahead so you can have that fertility program up to speed. The soil's ready when you're ready to plant.
Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't most of the labs actually have a category labeled wildlife plots or food plots or something like that now?
Yeah, that's a great point, Carl. They do. There is a form you'll fill out along with that soil sample that you bring in, and there is a mark or a box on there. Wildlife food plot. Is it mainly grains? Is it legumes? Is it a mix? It depends on the lab and how many recommendations they provide on what the information you're giving. So yeah, great question. Great point was you can select what you're going to be planting.
Okay. Well, let's go on a little bit. I saw, and I think I sent this to everybody ahead of time, that down in Iowa they have a plan for food plots and for wildlife, and they actually make a recommendation. And if you have so many acres of woods, how many acres of wildlife or food plot or deer plot should you have? Is there anywhere to go from there, Mark and Eric in Wisconsin?
I'm not aware of anything like that we produce necessarily. Just kind of being an avid deer nerd, it's kind of the general rule of thumb is 3 to 5%. But I think that's really generalistic. It depends on a lot of factors, especially if you're adjacent to commercial agricultural fields that are be providing supplemental nutrition as well. You may not need as much. And I think it kind of lends itself to another topic that I wanted to hit on, that food plots are supplemental nutrition. They shouldn't necessarily be designed to increase the deer herd. If you're having, population issues for one reason or another, likely that food plots aren't going to help solve those. They just help, increase the condition, body size, put on additional muscle mass, prepare them better for the winter, help with antler growth, as well as provide hunting opportunities. But in most cases, it's just supplemental.
Yeah, and that's something, in your example, Carl, about you said you had your new landowner with whatever 100 acres and 10 acres are open or something like that. Something you should evaluate, with those acreages, both the open acres and the timbered acres, is what you already have. Because like Eric said, food plots are supplemental. I like to say when I'm out doing visits with landowners that food plots are a great way to kill deer, but they're not really habitat management. They are a supplemental thing, and so native forages should be the base for what you're trying to do for all wildlife species. So, I think something that gets overlooked a lot, you guys have some open ground, and they think, well, I got to convert that over into a food plot. But, potentially that open ground could already be providing a pretty high quality food source. There's a lot of species that are basically considered weeds by most people. Ragweed, wild lettuce, asters, goldenrods, blackberry and raspberries, that as long as they're fairly new growth, where they've been refreshed, preferably through fire, are as good or better than most planted food plot species nutrient wise. So if you've already got that, then you should be looking to keep that, because that's not just providing food, but it's also then providing it's providing a lot more food than you're probably going to get out of any food plot that you plant. And two, it's providing not just food, but cover as well. Food plots really don't provide any kind of cover. Maybe corn, if you plant that, does, but otherwise, yeah, if you kind of got those old field areas that are thick and brambly and full of ragweed and goldenrod and whatnot, that's a lot of food. A lot of forage is also great cover for does to have fawns. It's great cover for turkeys to lay have their nests, and then also raise their broods. And game bird broods of all types, they're highly dependent in their growth phase on insects. They need that high protein to grow their feathers and fledge out and become adult birds. And you're not going to have much for insects in most food plots, some, but not a lot. But, in those old field areas, when there's a lot more of those forbs and flowering species, they're loaded with bugs, and that's absolutely necessary for their growth. And if you're thinking about the future and wanting to, have good turkey population on your property, as an example, that would be something you need to look at as maintaining. Doesn't mean you can't turn some of your stuff over into a food plot. There's no problem with that, but just think about what you got. And there's a lot of stuff you can do where you can get a ton of benefit without doing basically anything other than maintaining it as that kind of early successional weedy forb area.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Mark, when you talked about food that equals cover. And it may not be a traditional food plot as maybe the podcast was intended, but that's a growing trend of managing old fields, early successional habitat, identifying invasives and making sure those are out of there. But you're providing just as much nutritional benefit, if not more, with extra tonnage in addition to cover. So if you're going back to your example, Carl, about 100 acres, 10% of it being open, I always want to make sure that there's adequate cover. Maybe that's early successional habitat, maybe that's native warm season grass blends, because the bed, the deer, they bed most of the day and then they make their way to the food. So you could have the best food plot in the world, but depending on where they're bedding, they may never make it there in the daytime. So, even if we don't really plant any food plots on public land, and I'm primarily a public land hunter, I wouldn't hunt, close to a food source. I'm always trying to backtrack the deer and hunt closer to their beds, because then you're going to have a better chance of catching that animal on its feet during the daylight. And that's going to translate to venison in the freezer.
What about, and maybe this doesn't necessarily apply directly to what we're talking about with the food plots, as far as the planting, the management, but what about water sources for the wildlife and the food plots? So as a former person who worked with the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, through USDA, and wildlife food plots that were allowed on certain CRP ground, people wanted to put watering holes, water features in that was not permitted, which I understand, because it was more of a hunting type thing to say attract the deer, and that's not the point of these food plots. It's for supplemental. But do they tend to be of more value if they're near a water source, or doesn't it matter?
Yeah, everything drinks water, obviously. So
right, another nutrient we all need.
Right. Yeah. So, I do think having water on your property, if that's something you don't have, is important, and is a thing you can do. Though you do need to be careful about how you're doing that to make sure that you're, following whatever permits you may need and all that kind of stuff for creating different water holes and stuff like that. And another thing that needs to be on the radar of folks in most of Wisconsin, certainly the southern 3/4 of the state anyways, is that if you're creating ponds, those are generally stagnant water sources, and those can be a breeding source for the midges that spread EHD, which is epizootic hemorrhagic disease, right, Eric?
Yep.
And that can cause, well, it's that disease is almost always fatal to deer, and can cause fairly significant local reductions in deer population, especially in drier years. So that's something to keep in mind when you're making a stagnant pond. You might potentially be causing yourself a problem in a future year with EHD, though the population will rebound in years following that after that, because it's not something that sticks around. It just kind of comes and goes.
Wow, interesting. Didn't even know that was a issue that existed.
Yeah, and kind of adding to the deer biology side of things, deer do obviously drink water, but they get a lot of their water through a process called metabolic water. So it's water obtained through breaking down their food. And during the spring and summertime, at least when you have succulent vegetative food sources out there, they can get a lot of water through that. So in most cases, again, it kind of depends, but there's generally a pond or creek or river or something of that nature nearby, and it's probably not needed.
I want to back up just a step. Great question about water, and you always kind of wonder about that. But you talked about kind of more of a native habitat. So I have this 10-acre field. I keep going back to that, and it's been corn and soybeans for the last 20 years. The only thing that's going to come up maybe naturally are a bunch of weeds. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but we probably aren't going to have a whole lot of natives that are going to pop up. How do I go about getting that to good wildlife habitat? Or let's say I want to do half of that as some kind of native habitat, and the rest of it in food plots. What's my steps? I know Jerry told us soil test. What do I do next?
Well, I'll just take the next step, and then I'm sure Eric and Mark probably have some more detailed answers. But if it's more in that native side of things, find natives that, again, Wisconsin has a great listing of native plants in Wisconsin, but if you're in Green Bay versus Viroqua, those two natives are different. And so find out what is native to your area of the state or wherever you are. And then natives typically do not need all that fertility that corn, soybeans, legumes need. They're designed to grow in those soils that they're native to. So from that standpoint, the seed might be a little more expensive if you're going to try to reclaim that back into what we would consider a native planting versus maybe what we would consider a annual or perennial food plot. So there again, I think that's the seed's going to be more expensive, but those are going to be designed as perennials over the long haul. And then it gets back into that management. Is it mowing? Is it fire? And that's where Eric and Mark can provide much more detail on that.
Certainly, planting natives may be necessary if that, like you said in that example, 10 acres, that it's been corn and soybeans for forever. But some of those native weedy species I mentioned earlier, the ragweeds and stuff like that may be the stuff that comes in. It might be all stuff non-desirable, mostly non-native stuff like Canada thistle and burdock and parsnip and stuff like that. If you get that coming in, obviously that's not something you're going to want on your property because it's really not beneficial for anything, and that would be something you'd want to get rid of, and then you potentially need to pursue the planting native species, which like Jerry said, can be a bit expensive depending on what you're going to plant and how much you're going to plant. Generally, most of the time when folks are converting that open ground, they're going to be planting some form of prairie species, which are native to most parts of Wisconsin, though not all. That's something important to remember is, there are parts of Wisconsin where we did not have prairie, and so wouldn't necessarily be the best thing to be converting to. But generally the grasses are going to be what's cheaper, and the flowers are going to be what's more expensive. The flowers are the grasses are an important component of that because, they provide a lot of structure and some forage value, not much, but some, and they're a component of a native restoration. But the forbs are going to be what you get the most bang for your buck out of, but that going to be considerably more expensive depending on how diverse you want to plant. You could take that 10 acres and spend $30,000 planting it down if you wanted to make it just crazy diverse and really high rates of forbs, or you could spend $1,000 and it would be less diverse but still good. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, one of the quick and easy places that landowners can look for these native seeds are just going to the Pheasants Forever website. They have a store, and it's broke down by a bunch of different states, and the blends there are tailor made for particular state. So that's a pretty easy way to know that you're getting a seed mixture that is going to do well in your state. Again, some parts of the state don't necessarily need or should have prairies, but for the most part, you're going to be purchasing seed blend that's going to do well in Wisconsin. And I believe they also sell quite a few species individually. So if you want to make a custom seed blend, you can go in there and do that as well.
Another angle you could pursue is native shrub plantings, native shrub and tree plantings, because that's another thing you can do that actually would generally be somewhat less expensive than a prairie restoration. And you can get both cover and food out of that. You're talking about species like hazelnut and the different dogwood species, native prairie crabapple, American plum, hawthorn, stuff like that. Those are all really beneficial species that provide a lot of food that are great for a wide variety of wildlife, including deer, as well as others, both game and non-game species. Though you will have to, anytime you're planting a woody species of any format, you're going to need to protect it from those deer until it gets established. But yeah, and a good source for that with the Wisconsin DNR here, we have a state nursery that's out of Rapids, and people can order native shrub packages from that place for very economical prices. There is a minimum order you have to make from that, which I think is 300. I want to say, which is I think you can go down to 100 individual stems per species, but you have to have minimum order of 300 bare root seedlings to get that from them. But that's a great source. Frankly, native shrubs are kind of hard to get a lot of times from a commercial source, so Wisconsin, our state nursery is oftentimes the best resource for getting a lot of our native shrubs. That's another angle that folks could pursue if they're looking to convert some ag ground into good wildlife habitat and food.
Mark, with those native shrubs, do you have a list, or does DNR have a list of first of all what they are and what species of wildlife they may benefit the most and or most desirable for different species? Because otherwise you go to the commercial catalog and you end up like the property that I bought 29 years ago. That's all honeysuckle and help me out, the invasive that we have in all of our woodland here, Mark.
Buckthorn?
Buckthorn, yes. Somebody planted it at one time, and now it's just a mess. So how do we go about finding out for sure what's the best species to put in?
Oh, we do have, I know we have one publication titled Woody Cover for Wildlife, I think, that does kind of discuss some of our native, both tree and shrub species and what they're good for. Like I said, if you go with the resource of getting your shrubs from the state of Wisconsin and our tree nursery, you're not going to be getting invasive species because we only sell native species, and they're going to be beneficial to a wide variety of all our native wildlife, basically.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, just wanted to, as we're talking here today, again, welcoming anyone tuning in to our Cutting Edge podcast, search for alternative crops in Wisconsin. And we're fortunate enough today to be joined by Mark and Eric, both from the Wisconsin DNR, along with our special guest, Jerry Clark, as a guest today and not a host, from our Division of Extension. As we're talking here, another question or thought that I had, we're talking about where we can source different seeds, possibly get some trees from the state nursery. Are there any other and you both, Eric, you're part of your job is you can assist landowners with some of this and these wildlife plots. Are there different types of grants or funding available to help landowners that are interested in doing this?
Yeah, certainly, and that's that's an angle that I always try to promote when I'm meeting with landowners. One of the ones that we offer in-house is called Wiffle Gap or Wisconsin Forested Landowner Grant Program, and I think there's two caveats. You have to have a forest management plan, which it also provides cost share funding for, and I think it's 10 contiguous acres of timber as a minimum. And with that, I think we provide up to 50% cost share for priority projects and reforesting, hand planting of trees, TSI, invasive species removal, all fall along that priority one category. So a lot of the stuff that folks are doing on their own or that Mark and I both recommend when we're out on site visits likely can be cost shared just through an in-house DNR program. But there's also a ton of different other programs out there with the federal agencies that can provide cost share funding as well.
One other thing I'd plug with the Farm Bill programs and the CRPs and whatnot from that you can get through the NRCS and our federal agencies. Wisconsin DNR, we pay for Pheasants Forever to hire individuals known as Farm Bill biologists, and we have them. There's I don't know what 6 or 7 here in Wisconsin, I think. And they all have the kind of their regions of responsibility, and it's their entire job to go out and meet with private landowners and help them navigate when they're trying to do some of these habitat work to improve their property and to get some cost share from the federal government. It's these Farm Bill biologists' job to help these landowners figure out which program is the best fit for what they want to do on their property, as well as navigate the world of the Farm Bill programs and help them, go through the enrollment process and that kind of stuff. So that's a program I'd highly, highly recommend to prospective landowners if they are going to pursue funding through the federal government.
And there's that. Can they find out about that if they just were to simply call either of you at the local DNR office, or is that something that, say, NRCS or a Pheasants Forever type would be promoting?
Yeah, certainly you could get their contact information from your local biologist, your county biologist, in whatever county in the state you live in. Otherwise, I would imagine if you just Googled Wisconsin Farm Bill biologist, you'd probably go to a page that would take you right to the contact information and the for each of those biologists in the counties they cover. But yeah, I don't know. I would assume NRCS may as well also have that contact information for you. So there's a number of avenues you could go through to get that contact information.
Very good to know. Thank you.
And with NRCS, I think they have an office in every county, or at least is represented in every county. And maybe Ashley knows that better than anyone coming from the federal side. But their environmental quality incentive program is one that they do have a wildlife pollinator type programs, and you do need to sign up through USDA being a federal agency. Some grants, but I believe a lot of that is cost share too. It might be 70% that they'll pick the tab up on if it's a water feature or pollinators or restoration of something. So NRCS and your Natural Resource Conservation Service in your local county should have an office.
Jerry, along with being a co-host sometimes and being an expert at other times, he's also our webmaster for our Cutting Edge podcast page. And if Mark and Eric, if you have a couple references that are available online, if you can get those to me, I'll get them to Jerry, and we can connect those with the podcast to help people out as they have other questions and need a little bit more information. And those would be up shortly. Any other thoughts, Ashley or Mark, Eric, or Jerry?
Well, just appreciate the invite and being part of this, and being kind of on the other side of the fence. I just encourage folks to check out our Cutting Edge podcast. Got lots of neat information there, and I'll get the website updated as soon as I can, Carl.
That sounds great. And special thanks to Mark and Eric. There's a lot more, I think, to go into the thought of developing quality food plots, quality wildlife habitat than just planting some corn and soybeans. And I think you both pointed that out in a very nice manner today.
Absolutely. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, food plots are a rabbit hole discussion. It's easy for folks to get over their head sometimes. And, that's where Mark and I come into play. So I just really encourage folks who are wanting to start off on the right foot to give your local biologist a call, have these conversations with them. And if they don't know the answer, they're usually more than willing to find somebody who does. So, we are a resource to folks, and we want to see you succeed.
Great. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Ashley for our wind up.
Right. So we would like to thank everyone today for joining us on our podcast, The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. As always, you can go and listen to the recordings. Again, if you would like to capture more information on our website at fyi.extension.wis.edu. Thank you, everyone.
Brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.